Beginnings in America, the family puzzle in a suburban land. I'm Lauren Morse, and my story unfolds on the well-manicured streets of suburban Mon, Georgia, a place where identically trimmed lawns and basketball hoops dot every driveway like badges of normalcy. As a kid, my world spun around our two-story brick colonial at the end of Magnolia Lane. It looked straight out of one of those postcards you buy at the airport. White shutters, rose bushes, a picket fence so fresh it practically sparkled. But there's always more behind a driveway than meets the eye. Life inside was ruled by quiet routines and subtle pecking orders. My dad, Douglas, a retired retail manager, ran things by the clock and the ledger, organizing family life with the same precision he once reserved for store inventories and staffing charts. Every shelf in our house had to be in order, physically and metaphorically. He taught me how to balance a checkbook before I turned 10 and believed that where there was mess, there was madness waiting to pounce. My mom, Elaine, once an accountant, never lost her love for neat columns and decimal points. She kept the family albums so spotless and organized that each event, even Ethan's lost tooth, had its own laminated insert. Elaine ruled the kitchen from her perch by the bay window, often updating her budget spreadsheet while casseroles baked and the washer hummed. She loved numbers, but what she really cherished was certainty, a predictable rhythm, a future you could plan and prepay for. I was the second born, sharp-witted, but always a little left of center. My brother Evan, older by 3 years, was the golden child in every sense. His name topped every report card. His soccer trophies lined every shelf. His smiling face beamed from the mantel. Family dinners were showcases of his accolades, and neighborhood barbecues often ended with my parents retelling some version of Evan's first real estate triumph, or how Evan helped the neighbors fix their car. Evan's brilliance was effortless in their telling, his path preordained and paved with opportunity. By contrast, I was the curious puzzle piece that never quite fit. My interest ran toward uncovering patterns in the ordinary, sketching graphs, and tracking trends that meant nothing to the world outside my notebook. I'd pore over weather charts, code logic puzzles on outdated computers, and lose myself for hours thinking about how things connected. To my folks, my quirks were a phase, or a hobby, at best. "That's nice, Lauren, but maybe keep the math stuff for school," Mom would say, brushing off another chart pinched to the fridge. From the outside, we were the postcard, Saturday yard work with Dad, book club meetings with Mom, bake sales, birthdays marked by elaborate cakes and crowded living rooms. But from my side of the window, the pieces didn't always click. Looking back, I saw how every smile in the family photos masked a silent understanding. There were core members and supporting players in our story, and I'd have to work twice as hard to even land a bit part. Some kids rebel, some fade, quietly. Me, I started plotting my own story, reading between the lines. Home was safe enough. Suburbia's steady heartbeat forming the backdrop to my first ambitions. Yet even as a child, I sensed that fitting in would mean shrinking myself. It was the classics in Mon, Georgia. A little too perfect, a little too predictable. But life, as I was learning, stacks its pieces in ways no one can fully plan for. The overlooked daughter, living in the shadow of family expectations. From as early as I can remember, there was always a pecking order in our house, and I was never anywhere near the top. Patrick, 3 years older, radiated the self-assurance of someone who had always been told the spotlight was his. He was the star athlete, varsity soccer by sophomore year, MVP trophies glinting on the shelves, his report cards peppered with the kind of grades teachers whispered about in the teacher's lounge. Our parents reveled in his successes, showering him with new gadgets and effusive praise at every turn. Patrick's victories were family events, big banners, neighborhood barbecues, congratulatory cake. Mine were, well, easily forgotten. I wasn't a problem child. My grades were good, solid A's, and the occasional impressive project in math or art, but they were mere background music next to Patrick's performance. I built robot kits, won the school's science fair twice, even designed our class's yearbook cover my junior year. But for every science medal pinned to the fridge, there were 5 more pictures of Patrick accepting a sports award or grinning next to a college acceptance letter. My achievements always seemed quaint, maybe even a little odd, but never dazzling enough to hang in the living room. It was in those quiet moments, the ones nobody else noticed, that the feeling of being overlooked sunk in the hardest. At family dinners, I'd try to share news about my science club or describe the coding project I was working on, only to be gently redirected. "Let's hear about Patrick's game, Lena," Dad would interrupt. Mom would change the subject, reminding me to finish my salad or asking if I'd finished my homework. The pattern was always the same. Patrick's stories got applause. Mine stopped the conversation cold. Their favoritism wasn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes it came as a soft sigh. "That's nice, Lena, but you really should focus on things that matter," Mom would say, sliding my graphing calculator out of the way so she could vacuum the dining room. Sometimes it was practical. The college fund they'd so carefully set aside for Patrick wasn't there for me. They said I was independent, that I'd figure things out on my own. Words meant to sound supportive, but that landed more like a gentle shove out the front door. What hurt more than the lack of recognition was the lack of curiosity. My parents never asked about the competitions I was entering, or why I loved analyzing numbers late at night. When I taught myself Python using free online courses, they shrugged as if I'd learned to make a sandwich. Handy, but unspectacular. I spent hours building models and tracing economic trends in small-town America. But what they really wanted was a child they could brag about in ways the neighbors understood. Touchdowns, scholarships, business degrees. When I finally earned a summer research position at a local tech company, a competitive spot with real engineers, they hardly mentioned it. "Maybe after college, you'll land something like your brother's real job," Mom offered, half a smile, half a nudge. There were times when the gap between us felt like an unbridgeable valley, and times when I blamed myself for not being more like Patrick. Maybe if I talked less about data and more about sports. Maybe if I fit their idea of success a little better. But late at night, sketching out a new algorithm or planning a budget for my first semester of college, I realized I'd have to start applauding myself. If I ever wanted to be seen, I'd have to start by seeing myself, choosing my own path, even when left behind. When I was 18, standing at the crossroads of everything familiar and the unknown, I learned that sometimes the only way forward is entirely on your own 2 feet. My parents had made it clear. My brother got college funds and applause. My solo wins got little more than a distracted nod and a reminder to be practical. I remember that long, sticky summer right after high school graduation. My acceptance letter to the University of Nebraska-Omaha arrived on a muggy Thursday morning, crumpled from the mailbox, but shining with possibility. I opened it alone in my bedroom, my parents out running errands, Patrick at a soccer camp. I held that envelope like proof that the outside world had seen something in me our living room never did. I scraped together what I could. Between scholarships, work-study applications, and late-night research into grants, I realized there'd be no safety net waiting if I stumbled. My parents called it building character. It felt more like being quietly exiled. My part-time job at Betty's Book Nook, shelving romance novels, ringing up history buffs, was more than a way to cover textbooks. It was the first space where regulars called me by name without adding, "Oh, Patrick's sister." Each paycheck was a reminder that what I built would be mine alone. Moving into the dorms, I expected loneliness to hit me hard, but there was also this undercurrent, a stubborn pride that grew every time I navigated something new solo. Troubleshooting a broken laptop, figuring out how to do taxes from a cramped desk, learning to live with a roommate who was obsessed with indie jazz radio. Academically, I threw myself into everything. Data, analytics became my compass and lifeline. Numbers, unlike people, always made sense if you worked hard enough. I spent hours cross-checking business trends, running regression analyses for professors, staying up late to clean data sets for class projects. For the first time, my curiosity didn't feel strange. Instead, it drew fellow students to me. Some seeking advice, others just wanting to talk shop over greasy pizza at the library's 24-hour cafe. But being self-made meant sacrifice. I watched friends go home to packed care packages and stories about family phone calls. My parents' check-ins were brief, often sandwiched between updates about Patrick's internships or reminders to think about real estate jobs. When I earned the department's undergraduate research award, I forwarded the email to my mom and dad. Their reply, "That's nice. Maybe grad school will pay better." On tough days, I wondered if they even read it at all. Instead of letting it poison me, I leaned into my own momentum. I started freelancing with local businesses, helping them translate sales data into strategy. My first client, a quirky coffee shop owner named Maria, hugged me after a single campaign turned around her slowest quarter in years. That hug and her thank you note felt more real than any praise I'd ever gotten at home. By junior year, I'd built a portfolio and a network of mentors who cheered my quirks and ambition. I found friends who understood the difference between lookup and pivot tables, who celebrated my internship at an ecotech startup with late-night tacos and matching spreadsheets instead of envy or indifference. After graduation, I took a leap and moved to Omaha's bustling downtown, scoring a job as a data analyst at a fast-growing marketing analytics firm. My apartment was small and cluttered with plants, but it was wholly mine. The city felt full of possibility. The skyline became my new measuring stick. Not my brother, not my parents, just me versus my last best effort. There were moments I ached for acknowledgement, especially as my responsibility at work grew. I led campaigns for national brands, watched my insights turn into higher revenues and new jobs for my team. At company gatherings, there was laughter, high fives, and the kind of belonging I'd craved since childhood. I sent home a selfie from my first speaking gig at a tech conference. Just a cool, nervous smile and the Omaha skyline behind me. My parents never replied, but I let that be their silence to hold, not mine to carry. What started as being left behind became a source of pride. I realized autonomy was a gift, not a curse. My evenings were spent budgeting in cozy cafes, Skyping with friends who cared about what I was building, and sometimes just watching rain streak the windows, content that every dollar, friendship, and line of code was something I'd fought for. And on the hardest days, I'd remind myself, I chose this path, my own, not out of rebellion or bitterness, but out of faith in possibilities beyond the boundaries my family could imagine. I didn't need them to understand. Instead, I learned to applaud myself, building a life as sturdy and surprising as any story they'd ever told about Patrick. The first signs of the truth nobody wanted to see. In adulthood, you expect the stories you were told as a child to find footing in reality. My parents talked about Brian as if success came easily. Every resume bullet point became an unchallenged fact. Every minor stumble, a lesson he'd no doubt overcome. I saw him less in those years, both of us now in our respective cities. Brian, supposedly thriving in Chicago's law scene, and me, a data analyst in Omaha, carving out my own patch of the world. But my skill set, asking questions, looking beyond the surface, didn't fade at the city limits. If anything, it got sharper. And soon, cracks began to show. One autumn, I returned to Indianapolis for Abby's birthday. Brian arrived late, behind the wheel of a brand new Cadillac, all gleaming white paint and shining rims. My parents raved about how it suited him, how he'd finally hit his stride. As we gathered for cake, Brian talked in vague terms. Big case wrapped up, huge payout. I congratulated him and asked about the firm's details. He danced around specifics, changing the subject to my job or the weather. A tiny wrinkle, barely noticeable at first, but I filed it away. Over the next year, the inconsistencies multiplied. Abby told me stories in passing, how Brian spent weekends traveling, but never seemed to stay in one place. My parents got mysterious phone calls, their excitement followed by hushed, stressed conversations behind the den door. At Christmas, Dad skipped his usual jokes and hardly touched his pie. Mom's smile was brittle. She kept reminding me that not everyone succeeds on the first try. I found myself on the outside, trying to peek in. My old tendencies reemerged, pattern recognition, a nose for details. When Brian left his iPad on the kitchen counter during a summer barbecue, I noticed open tabs, overdue payment reminders, frantic emails to colleagues about managing expectations. Still, Mom and Dad propped him up at every turn. Everyone hits a rough patch. Your brother's just working hard. The tipping point came through a chance encounter. One Friday night in Omaha, my friend Tessa, an investigative journalist, invited me out for drinks. "You ever get the sense Brian's not doing as well as your folks say?" she asked. After her third beer, hesitant, I admitted I'd had doubts. Tessa offered to pull public records, just for fun. Within a week, she called, voice hushed. "Cass, his name's all over lawsuits, creditors, dissolved partnerships, a house foreclosure in Chicago. I thought you should know." For a moment, I oscillated between denial and grim vindication, pieced together the little things, Brian's lack of specifics, the uptick in calls from home, the increasing tension at family gatherings. I realized my parents weren't covering for Brian out of ignorance, but out of desperation, terrified what it might look like if their golden child failed, and equally afraid, I think, that someone else might finally notice me. The burden of truth grew heavier. I began my own quiet investigation, combing local court records, tracing digital trails. Every answer sparked 3 more questions, but the facts were clear. Brian's world was not as it seemed. Our family, so invested in storytelling, had vetoed reality in favor of a fantasy. And I saw, first with shock, then with sadness, just how much they'd risked for a lie. When the scales finally tipped, I knew I would be the one to drag the truth into daylight. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being noticed. The friend who helped me see it all, clues unraveled. Over coffee, looking back, I realized that sometimes you need someone outside your storm to help you piece it all together. The right question, a chance conversation, An unexpected nudge in the middle of an ordinary day. For me, that person was Olivia Price. She was the kind of friend who'd text me memes at midnight and drop everything when I needed a vent session, no matter the time zone. We met at a data boot camp in Omaha, bonded over bad cafeteria coffee and a mutual hatred of unnecessary meetings. She quickly became a fixture in my new life, a little reckless, fiercely loyal, and always attuned to when something felt off. On a windy Saturday in October, Olivia called. "Len, want to grab a coffee?" Her tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of urgency.
I did it, okay?
I could hear
I
it
swear I
in the
didn't
way
mean
she
to, but they
lingered
know.
on the last
They're coming
syllable.
for me.
How she didn't wait for my usual, "Yeah, give me 20. 20 minutes later, we were seated by the window at Bean Theory, a little indie cafe that I'd adopted as my second living room. Sunlight filtered through orange maple trees, and the space buzzed with the low hum of other people's conversations. A cocoon where I felt both anonymous and safe. Olivia dove in right away. "Hey, so I bumped into Greg from our old project last night. Did you know your brother's name is floating around since that grapevine development collapsed?" I froze. I'd thought about the cracks in Evan's stories, but I always assumed it was family drama swept under the rug, not street gossip. Olivia, noticing my silence, softened her voice. "Look, Len, I overheard it by accident, and I know it's not really any of my business. But people are saying some ugly things about his business up north. Investors are pissed. Contractors haven't been paid. The word is shady." My hands curled around my mug. I had run little background checks, spotted a few warning signs, but I'd never pieced it all together. Not until now, with Olivia sifting through the rumor mill so I wouldn't have to listen alone. She nudged her cup closer, voice dropping. "I said you probably didn't know, do you?" The weight of every holiday, every unreturned call settled on my chest. I nodded. I had a feeling, but hearing it out loud makes it real. I knew my parents were covering for him, but I didn't realize just how deep it ran. They're bailing him out while I'm here, hustling for every dollar, making my own life from scratch. Olivia reached across the small, chipped table and gave my wrist a quick squeeze. "Len, you've always been the one putting in the work. Maybe that's what they're afraid to admit. Maybe they don't even see it." For the next hour, we strategized, flipping through details on laptops, pulling up property records, press releases, accounts from angry subcontractors. Olivia, being a digital sleuth and never one to back down, even found public filings that linked Evan to at least 2 LLCs wrapped up in litigation. As she scrolled, she looked up at me. "You do realize he's one step away from a bankruptcy hearing, right?" Part of me recoiled. My little brother, he'd been the favored child, with the world handed to him in neat envelopes and shiny keys. He always came across as so put together. Even his Instagram is all fancy brunches and business travel. But when I really think about it, all those photos are from the same 2 or 3 events, recycled to look like more. Olivia arched an eyebrow. "Smoke and mirrors. Len, you know more about numbers than anyone. Trust your gut. If something isn't adding up, it's because someone's doing the math wrong." We worked in near silence for a while, the back and forth of caffeine and code breaking up the quiet, only when Olivia let out a soft whistle. "He owes way more than he lets on. Several lawsuits, potential foreclosures. Either your parents don't know, or they do, and they desperately want to hide it." That afternoon, as rain streaked down the windows and the Denver game played, muted on the cafe TV, I felt both dread and clarity. Olivia became my co-investigator, my reality check, with each browser tab we opened, showing another claim, another failed project. My childhood myths crumbled a little more. By 3 o'clock, we had a digital folder loaded with records linking Evan to mounting debts, unpaid wages, and even a flagged IRS return. Olivia sat back, fingers interlaced behind her head. What are you going to do? In that moment, I didn't really know. Part of me wanted to let it all burn. Leave my parents to realize on their own that their golden boy was living on borrowed time while they wrote the checks. But another part ached to just have the truth acknowledged, to finally let go of the script where I was always second best, the disappointment, the invisible child in the room. I wanted my parents to see me, not as a backup plan or a reluctant success story, but as the one person in the family who'd always been honest, always done the work. I gazed out the window, watching cars fishtail through wet leaves, and wondered aloud, Olivia, what if they never believe me? What if they'll never see the truth? She shrugged, not unkindly. Maybe they won't, Len, but you can't control what they'll admit. You can only decide when you stop living for their version of the story. A quiet fell between us, the kind only good friends can share. Olivia finally grinned. Besides, that's what friends are for, to stand beside you when the dust clears, even if that means sipping cold coffee while you call your parents out. I laughed, despite myself, that tight ache beginning to loosen. Maybe I hadn't expected to learn so much over an afternoon coffee, but the real miracle was realizing that the truth matters, even when it shatters every safe narrative you grew up holding. With Olivia by my side, combing through hard evidence and honest conversation, I felt ready to stop hiding, too. She didn't just help me connect the dots. She gave me the courage to do something about it. That night, as I loaded our findings onto a thumb drive and watched Olivia disappear into the fall dusk, I felt a strange sense of peace. No matter what else happened, I wasn't alone with my suspicions anymore. Sometimes your real family is the one that helps you shine a flashlight on the parts nobody wants to see and stands with you as you decide what to do next. The confrontation at the anniversary, returning the truth in front of everyone. There are rare moments in life when an entire family's carefully constructed myth teeters on the edge, seconds away from collapse, and you realize you're the one who just might tip it over. For me, it happened beneath the golden chandeliers of Grandview Banquet Hall, on the night when everyone was supposed to be celebrating my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. The room was ablaze with old money glitz, white linens, crystal glasses, and 100 faces from church and the neighborhood, all eager to be seen in the company of the perfect Brooks family. From my post at the far end of our table, next to the coat rack, per tradition, I watched the evening unfold like a play I knew by heart. My father, grinning in his tailored suit, played the warm patriarch, shaking hands and recounting stories about Brian, his favorite subject. My mother, regal in emerald and pearls, basked in every compliment, letting sly jabs about my eternal instability slip between canapes and toasts. The air was thick with old resentments disguised as inside jokes, and I could almost physically feel the tension building. Each speech revolved around Brian, of course. First came his law firm triumphs, then the story of his supposed real estate investments, then a new car he'd gifted our parents, leased, naturally, but nobody mentioned that. When it was my turn for a toast, my father's voice rang out, a little too loud. Here's to Brian, who's never needed a dime. Cassidy, what are you working on these days, honey? Still living paycheck to paycheck? The laughter that followed stung in the way only family's laughter can sharp, knowing, and laced with centuries of unspoken rules. For a long, humming moment, I thought about letting it go. I could quietly sit through one more round of humiliation, smile for the photos, and carry my wounds home as usual. But something in me refused. Maybe it was the accumulation of years. Maybe the folders of cold, hard evidence waiting in my purse. Or just the sight of my sister-in-law, Abby, staring at the floor, looking more exhausted than usual. I stood, glass in hand. My voice shook just a little at first. Actually, that's not entirely true. Faces turned. Since everyone's here tonight, maybe it's time we have a real toast. I want to celebrate what it takes to actually do things on your own. Because, believe it or not all of us got a head start. You could have heard ice cubes settle as I reached into my bag and withdrew a neatly organized folder. My own financial records, printouts of Brian's lawsuits, and emails his creditors had sent to my parents. I handed copies to my parents, my brother, Abby, and even Mr. Carlson, our family's oldest friend. Gasps fluttered around the table. I read aloud, facts, not accusations. The mounting debts, the fake business fronts, the desperate emails pleading for wire transfers. As the evidence tumbled out, murmurs spread. My mother tried to hush me. "Cassidy, this is not the place. Please." But the whispers only grew sharper. Abby, with trembling hands, confirmed my account. "It's all true. Brian owes more than we could ever pay. I'm filing for divorce." The entire evening crumbled in an instant. Friends awkwardly looked away. A few guests quietly checked their coats. And my father seemed smaller, pressed flat by disappointment and exposed secrets. The worst part wasn't anger. It was the profound, echoing silence that followed. Every anecdote, every accolade my parents had spun over the years, unraveled before their audience. My hands still shook, but there was also a wild relief. For once, I wasn't the one hiding, and the room finally, impossibly, saw me for who I was. A woman who'd built her own life and who refused to let a lie stand in the place of truth. Brian, red-faced and cornered, muttered about misunderstandings and temporary setbacks. A few family members tried to step in, an uncle babbling about forgiveness, Mom dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. But I no longer cared for a pretty ending. If this was a public shattering, so be it. I looked at my parents and said quietly, "You always spoke about pride and values. I kept your name clean. He didn't. I hope tonight you finally realize who stood on her own." The drive home that night was the strangest peace I'd ever felt. The myth was broken, yes, but for the first time, I didn't have to carry the weight alone. All those years of silence had prepared me for this night, when the truth had finally been louder than the applause. Choosing peace, letting go of recognition that never comes. After the chaos of that anniversary night, the world just quieted. It wasn't a clean break, the sort that movie montages offer, where loose ends are tied with a neat bow and the hero strides off unburdened. Real life's a slow detangling, every day a little closer to air. I remember waking up the next morning with a fuzzy ache in my chest, the echoes of what I'd done still ricocheting against my ribs. There was no flurry of apology texts or desperate phone calls from my parents. Instead, I glanced at my phone and saw the total absence of their numbers in my recent call log. That silence was more staggering than any argument. At first, I replayed the confrontation over and over in my mind. Doubts wriggled in. Maybe I'd been cruel. Maybe I'd ruined the family for nothing. But then, I'd think back to every month, every year, I spent waiting for their acknowledgement, for some basic respect that seemed only ever reserved for my brother. Did I really lose something I'd ever possessed in the first place? Instead of spiraling, I set about rebuilding the routines that made my world make sense. Mornings in Des Moines, were gentler than those old suburban dawns. No rush to beat anyone to the shower, just coffee brewed slowly and emails answered from my kitchen table. Sunlight throwing gold rectangles across my laptop keys. The work I did mattered, even if nobody from my past applauded from the stands. My boss valued clarity, and friends saw merit in the way I broke down chaos into patterns and plans. Here, I wasn't an afterthought. I was Lena, the one you called when you needed the truth, even when it was ugly. It was odd how different loneliness felt when it was chosen. In childhood, being overlooked created a frantic, raw ache, a longing so sharp it colored every interaction. But now, the space I carved for myself was deliberate. I'd walk across the pedestrian bridge at sunset, feeling the hum of city life around me. Each step, both a letting go and a claiming. I decorated my apartment with memories I made alone, or with the friends who stuck by my side. I invited people over for dinner and allowed myself the freedom to laugh too loud or to soak in a Friday night of silence without apology. Some nights, the weight of isolation pressed in again. That's the truth people rarely tell. Letting go doesn't mean you stop yearning. It just means you choose what and whom you'll give that precious longing to. When I found myself scrolling through old family photos, a pang sometimes twisted in my chest. Did they even look at my picture now, buried in a box somewhere? Did Mom ever wonder why her phone was so quiet during holidays? But every time those what-ifs surfaced, I gently placed them aside. Finding contentment became an act of will and habit. I threw myself into projects that stretched my curiosity. I applied for a big fellowship focused on data-driven justice reforms, and got it. Not because of some hand-waving family connection, but because I'd earned my reputation with sweat and stubbornness. My name appeared in a local magazine's 30 Under 30. Colleagues cheered. My parents never sent a note, but it didn't sting the way it might have before. I grew closer to people who recognized my worth without needing a resume or a last name as a preamble. Olivia and I started a coding club for girls downtown, teaching them not just Python and logic, but how to take up space, ask big questions, reshape narratives that once wrote them out. Watching those girls light up at their own breakthroughs filled me with pride that no family ceremony ever could. The final step in claiming peace was forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. I wrote my mother a letter I never sent, pouring out every ache and angry wish. How I'd wanted to be clapped on the back instead of patted on the head. How I'd needed her to see the work, not just the win. The truth is, she and my father loved in the only way they ever learned, measured by headlines and trophies, and the smooth performance of family perfection. That knowledge made me sad, but not angry anymore. Their love could never reflect all of me, and I was done shrinking to fit their mirror. One cool afternoon, sitting with Olivia on the porch as cicadas pulsed in the trees, she asked, "Would you go back if they called?" I took a long sip of iced tea and considered the question, honestly. Maybe. But I wouldn't go looking for the old kind of approval. I just want to know they finally saw me. And that was it. Peace didn't mean wiping out every scar, or pretending I didn't occasionally wish things were easier. It meant loving the life I built, mess and all, far away from the echoing hollowness of being the other child. I slipped into a new season, anchored not by resentment, but by quiet certainty. Each day that passed, the family I'd chosen, friends, colleagues, even mentees, wove itself tighter around me. The applause I craved was replaced by sincere laughter at small victories, and the quiet knowledge that I was enough, all on my own. Sometimes, walking through the busy streets, a stranger would flash a familiar smile, and I'd remember that the world is wide, and recognition is more generous out here than within 4 stubborn brick walls. If someone had told me, as a child, that my proudest moment would be stepping into the light alone, I'd have doubted them. But now I know. There's wild, bright magic in choosing your own peace and refusing to keep knocking on locked doors. My story is mine to tell, even if the old chorus never sings my name.